I had developed my plan for escape. I approached the cell door and began to complain of serious pain in my abdominal area. I might be having a rupture. I didn't know what it was, but I was in pain. The guard, rather hesitatingly, approached and to my delight opened the door. I wasted no time and snapped his neck. I had to get out of here as fast as possible. I stealthily made my ascent up to the entrance and quickly made a dash for the door. Once outside, I wasted no time in running from the building. I had escaped, but now what? I ran quickly down the boulevard away from my imminent recapture, and when I felt an appropriate distance had been acquired, I stopped to catch my breath. I quickly phoned my compatriots, and they sent me to a secure safe house in the heart of the city. It was a rather depressing neighborhood, to say the least, but the apartment was unlisted in any paperwork associated with law enforcement. The furnishings were sparse, and it had the faint odor of beer and marijuana as it drifted in from the street below. I sat and collected my thoughts. I was wanted now by the secret government authorities. I felt sure they would not issue notice to any local agency, as that would expose them to questions they prefer not to explain. I called to notify my office I had arrived, and began detailing my situation to my trusted fellow officers. They assured me that I should remain in seclusion while they looked into the matter, and soon they would arrive to discuss our next moves. I agreed. I cautiously approached the window, and ventured to scan the area. I had a decent vantage point from which to observe the streets below. No one was of notice to me that might prove a danger. I was apparently safe, for the moment. I began to now develop my next move. The force of my fellows arrived and I went to greet them. They asked if I was in immediate need of anything. I said perhaps a revolver and ammunition to accompany it. They complied. I returned to my room. I took it upon myself to abruptly leave without detection, and headed to the bluffs of Windenburg. I wanted to search once more for anything of consequence. All signs continued to point to something associated with this area that was a leading cause for this current situation. Nothing stood out to me that I had not surveyed before. I made my way to a small vantage point between the boulders of the bluff. To my utter surprise, and without any foreshadowing, I observed Mr. Goth dashing from the rocks. Strange sight it was indeed. I called for backup assistance, to help me discover what was hidden there. They assured me that, without broadcasting their movements, they would soon arrive with a force sufficient to investigate anything that might prove a danger. They were soon on hand, and I explained my sighting. Where had Mr. Goth been leaving with such haste? They broke into various small groups and began to search anew. What might we all find here on the bluffs? The culmination of this investigation was at hand, I could feel it. But I still had a nagging suspicion that Mr. Goth was now the key to solve this beast of burden I had been carrying. Had he been involved more than his demeanor suggested? He had been the single individual associated with this case that I had never suspected was in an influence role. What could he possibly have been doing at the site? Abruptly an officer yelled of his discovery among the boulders. He had located a cave entrance. We all immediately converged on the area of his notice. It was a small opening in the rocks that appeared to lead inside to a chamber. We gathered at the entrance. Then it was, the end of my quest. We had found something aloof at the bluffs. A hidden cave. We all gathered our courage, checked our revolvers with ammunition, armed ourselves, and together we entered the cave. To our absolute amazement we found ourselves inside a rather cavernous cave embedded in the rocks. It housed an array of machines and computers. It looked to be a laboratory of sorts, or a scientific examination room. The devices fitted about the room were quite incredible. And I took note that the professor's machine had been assembled in the corner beside other advanced-looking contraptions of an origin I could not have guessed. Officers gathered what evidence they could that would appear to be discarded paperwork of a sort. Perhaps it would prove valuable when examined later. We made the trek to the next level. I was not prepared for what we saw there. In the upper chamber lie several operational tables and medical contraption of various sorts. It appeared that several people, if one could use the term loosely, were entombed in large glass structure that resembled test tubes of a nature. There were cells for holding individuals. Was this the experiment site that had butchered and deformed the Sims? Turning the successful experimented into the monster I had seen at the science facility. It was a terrible and frightening scene to guess what had gone on in this room. Were Sims kidnapped and held here for experimentation? By whom? And for what reason? To transform them into monsters of mass destruction of some sort? For a tidy profit? Or for another reason altogether? I hadn't a clue. It still made no sense to me how someone, or something, could perform these ungodly operations on these people. It would take a madman, or at the very least, psychopath. I would find out when the rooms were completely searched and documented. But, alas, that was not to be. Without warning, the entire structure exploded. It sent my ears numb and the concussion rendered my mind foggy for a brief moment. The entire roof of the cave had been blown apart by a terrific blast. A huge crater now lay where the cave had once been. All evidence was destroyed in a single moment. I suddenly realized that just as the cave had been destroyed, so had several of my companions. They had died in the explosion. It was a difficult moment for the survivors. What had caused this catastrophe? My thoughts rushed to Cassandra, busily playing house at my tiny trailer in the woods. I raced home with my remaining task force. I held her tightly as my friend searched the area for any sign of danger. It was then she told me of her impending birth of my child. She was pregnant. I had no idea she was not in possession of birth control. Triple idiot that I was. I couldn't allow myself to become detached from my investigation at the moment. And happily followed her request to feel the baby. Was I the intended target all along? It was a plausible reason so much destruction had followed me throughout this entire ordeal. I told Cassandra we needed to leave immediately to my safe house. It was secure for the time being, and no one was to be informed where we were going. She reluctantly agreed. We arrived at the safe house apartment and Cassandra's expression betrayed her dislike to her new surroundings. I assured her we would be safe here, and I would take her from this as fast as possible. But I needed to continue forward. To solve this once and for all. She accepted my explanation and agreed to comply with anything I would suggest to help. I did suggested that she, perchance, take to the little cot and sleep a bit, as the excitement was a bit of a straining condition in her present state. She resisted and, after a little persuasion was applied, she again with reluctance agreed to a short nap, if I promised to wake her for tea. I went to the window to remove any fears of discovery. The streets below were not in any disarray, and all seemed to be calm. I now felt that I had the answers tightly in my grasp. Finally, it was now time to pay a rather stern visit to her father. He would answer my queries now, with or without his cooperation. Hopefully you might join me. Good night.